Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Roll the Dice with Dave. I am your host, Dave Rivera. And before we get started into everything, I want to welcome anybody who's out there on Facebook and on YouTube Live. Please like, share, and subscribe to Roll the Dice with Dave on either Facebook or YouTube. And let's go ahead and be the change we want to see in the world. I am really excited for tonight. Got a great guest on, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his thoughts, views, and having this conversation, because these are some of the steps we need to take in order to be the change we want to see in the world. So I want to go ahead and bring out my guest, Brad. How's it going, Brad? It's good to see you tonight, man.
Hey, Dave. I'm doing well. Thank you. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm really glad to have you on. Like I said, part of the main premise of this show is to let's be the change we want to see in this world. And part of that is having conversations with people that have different views, all different types of thoughts and viewpoints. But before we get into tonight's meat of the conversation, I just want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about who you are. Who is Brad Borst?
All right, guys. So I'm a simple man at the end of the day. That's kind of like how I describe myself. I've lived different places around the country. I grew up in the Midwest. I spent time in North Carolina. I spent 8 years in Washington, D.C., bumping elbows with a lot of greasy politicians and working at some big hotels up there and stuff. And I got to see a different side of people. I got to see, middle America from hardworking Iowans that are just trying to take care of themselves and their families and their loved ones. I got to see people in North Carolina that love their college basketball and their sports. And then I got to see what that beltway looks like in Washington, D.C. and how things were, 10 years ago to how they are now. And I truly do know why they call it the swamp. Not only is it built on a former swamp, but it's become a swamp. And, we can get into that a little bit later. But ultimately, I feel like I have some very good life experience, and I have some wisdom that I've gotten along the way, all while keeping my focus on my faith, my family, and love for one another and love for your neighbor. So that's kind of where I stand.
Cool. Now I do know you were at East Carolina. When exactly were you at? Because I know our paths crossed way back when there.
Yeah, so
Um,
I was at ECU from 2001 to 2005, and I know you taught hospitality management there, correct?
yeah, that is
And
correct. And I got there just as you were leaving, right? Just as
okay,
you were graduating. I think we had like a one semester overlap.
that's
Um,
correct.
so I remembered the name when I first saw it, and I was like, man, but I think it was just a one semester overlap. Um, so you were there 2001 and 2005. How long did you stay in Greenville after you graduated? Did you stay
I
there long, or did
left.
you left right after that?
Yeah, I was out. I got a job working for Marriott in October of 2005, and I graduated in December of 2005. So I knew right when I graduated, I was moving up to Washington, D.C. to work at the Renaissance on Ninth and K, where I spent a couple years there. And then I worked at the Marriott in Greenbelt, right outside of DC, I believe is where it is. It's where the Redskins stay right before they play football.
Okay.
I spent some time in Baltimore working for Sheraton in Columbia, Maryland. And then I finished up there working for the Green Turtle. I'm sure if you've been to DC and you've been to see the Caps play or the Wizards, you may be familiar with the Green Turtle Sports Bar, which is right there on the corner of F. I can't remember, but it's attached to the Capital One Arena, which is I don't think it's there anymore, but that's where I worked for a while.
Oh, cool. And I know your wife is also a fellow pirate,
Yeah,
because I
yes,
remember your wife as well. And you also have is it a son? You have a son as
yep,
well?
yep. I've got an 8 month old. Well, he's 9 months now, and it's been the biggest blessing I've ever had in my entire life. I've got a beautiful wife who I think she had a couple classes with you, and we actually didn't know each other in college. She ended up going to Meredith, ECU, NC State, Duke. She kind of got on that bus and went around, but she ended up, finding her place, getting a good degree, and like many, kids that graduated in that 2005 to 2009 range, they had a lot of different jobs. When the economy crashed in 2009, a lot of people lost work, and a lot of people, would start a job, last 9, 10 months, a year or two, and then have to go somewhere and then go somewhere else. And it was like a revolving door for a lot of companies. And I think she ended up going through that, but now she's got a great job. I was lucky to already have a great job in Washington, D.C. And I just feel like if you lived inside the bubble, which obviously is around D.C., anything 100 miles in that area, you weren't really affected by the financial crisis, because the amount of money that's pumped through that city. But I have seen it, and in other parts of the country that it affected, especially here in North Carolina. So it's
No.
definitely.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. So I want to move into the next segment. Is there anything that you've been experiencing lately that you just kind of want to talk about? A book you've read, things you've been listening to, shows you've been watching, anything that's hit you lately that you're like, oh, I just think people need to know about this.
I mean, I think based on where I am in my life, I mentioned it a little while ago. Me putting my family first and putting my relationship with Christ first. And he talks about a few things, and those important things are faith, love, and hope, and loving your neighbor as yourself. And I don't really drive it home too much with people. I just think like that's the expectation, is the golden rule. And I think in America right now we've kind of lost sight of that. Um, And I think a lot of that has to do with the rhetoric of some of the presidents that we've had. And I'll call them out for what they are, all of them. I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, middle of the road, libertarian. It doesn't matter to me if I see them as a threat to or dividing the country. I'm going to call them out for how it is. That's how I see it. So, and I've seen it for the last 10 years. Is these politicians, they get us all worked up. We obviously know they pit white versus black, rich versus poor, gay versus straight. Now it's vaccinated versus unvaccinated, which is absolutely, 5 years ago, you would have told me that and I would have been like, you're crazy. What are you even talking about? So I just feel like as Americans, if we would focus more on taking care of each other than worry about all the white noise that going on around us, we could live a much healthier life, whether it be financially, spiritually, less stress, more motivated. Just having kind of all those things meshed together, I think, is the ultimate goal. And that's what the American dream is.
Okay, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I want to switch up real quick, just to ask you. Being a hospitality and tourism guy, our industry took a big hit. So as things have kind of settled down and people are getting out there a little bit more, I've been asking all my guests, have you done anything, or is there a trip on the horizon you plan on taking? Have you and your family done anything that has really helped to boost the hospitality and tourism management industry, or do you have anything planned in the near future?
Yes. So in 2000, I guess 20, my wife and I were actually supposed to take our honeymoon in May of 2020, and that got canceled. It was a delayed honeymoon, but it got canceled because of COVID. And we were going to go to, I think, Puerto Rico or somewhere down there, and that trip got canceled. And then we ended up, I feel like all of 2020, though, I was lucky enough to where I kind of put the pandemic behind me and said, I need to just focus on life, as far as not think about, like I said, all the white noise and everything going on. And when Anna got pregnant, I had to focus on a job. Well, I was actually working in the hospitality when the coronavirus started. And when they made us all start wearing masks, I kind of thought, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever had to do in my life. And I did about 2 weeks into the pandemic, and I left the industry after about 20 years of working in hotels and restaurants. I call it quits, and I ended up going to work for a general contractor as a project manager, and now I'm doing sales with them, and I love it. I have much more free time. Time to spend with my family, my friends, my loved ones, get back into some hobbies that I had years ago, as well as, just kind of stay healthier and focus on the things that are important. And during that time, my wife and I, we obviously had our son who was born 9 months ago. We got a new home that, we got a new car. It was like, we didn't focus on all the noise that came out of DC. We focused on living our life to how we wanted to live. And I think that was kind of what a lot of Americans forgot about. They forgot about how to live because they were so worried about fear. And me and my wife, us being, Christians, we don't live in fear. And I keep telling a lot of men, I say, hey, when Jesus left this earth, he said, everybody is sheeps, that we all are. We're all sheeps. That's what he told us. And there's going to be wolves among sheep. And I consider myself a lion, because I will fight for my beliefs, and I will fight for my family. And I feel like I have a voice for that too. And I thank you for having me on for that as well.
Oh, no, you're welcome.
As far as future hospitality goes, we go out to eat, we support local business. She goes and does massages and all that fun stuff. I go out to eat at least 5 times a week because I'm on the road around town, and mostly eat local, try to stay away from chain restaurants. They really don't need help right now. And then we have another trip coming up. We're trying to make a trip down to Cancun in January to kind of finish up that honeymoon that we never got.
Well, I wish you guys the best, and I hope you get that honeymoon that you haven't taken, and get to do it soon. You mentioned something. You talked about your Christian beliefs, and you are a very faithful individual. And I've had a lot of conversations with individuals who said they are Christian, and sometimes this topic comes up. So I just wanted to throw this out to you, see your thoughts on it, in your opinion. A lot of them have expressed that they feel that part of the issue is that prayer is no longer allowed in schools. Do you think prayer needs to be brought back into schools?
Um, I think as far as inside the classroom, not necessarily, but I do feel like having it available for students when they come in the morning, whereas Christians want to meet at the flagpole pole and pray for their fellow students or for their nation, for their leaders, for their principal, for things that are going on in the community. I think that should be perfectly welcome. And I remember growing up, in North Carolina in a public school, and we had every morning, I feel like a group of us met at the flagpole to pray. And then a group of us met after school at the flagpole to pray. And then we also met before sports games. So I do think it's necessary, or it's not necessary, but I do think it should be welcome, because in the United States, that is protected in the First Amendment, freedom of religion, just like freedom of speech is. And I feel like if schools gave the opportunity to students, it's a no-brainer. It should be welcome.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. This is going to lead us into this main segment, this big chunk of what we're going to talk about. So I want to start with the election in 2016. You and I kind of had a little conversation. What were your thoughts as things were leading up to the election? After the results came out, what was going on as far as your thoughts and what was taking place when all that was transpiring?
Okay, so this election in 2016 obviously was a very polarized election, because it was the first time in American history where we had a political outsider, being Donald Trump, running for office, and he was obviously not favored to win, the heavy underdog versus Hillary Clinton, or at least that's what the media wanted us to see, was he was behind in every poll. Well, clearly they were wrong. They got it dead wrong. And when Trump got in, I think that changed, the perspective of a lot of Americans for a long time. They wanted to see, I think they wanted to see what a political outsider would look like and what he could do for our nation. Yes, his policies, his rhetoric wasn't the best, meaning he was somewhat divisive from time to time. But I think sometimes he needed to be, because he felt like a lot of Americans that didn't have the voice, and he was their voice. I do think a lot of his policies were great for our country, as far as his willingness to close the border, only allow people in that wanted to be here to work hard and to earn the American dream, and not just live off the American taxpayer. I do think that he brought a lot of jobs back that were, kind of left behind, as far as the warehouse jobs and the middle America jobs, bringing steel back, bringing jobs back from overseas, cutting taxes, just kind of getting everything back on track from that perspective. And I know people say, well, he only cut taxes for the super wealthy. Well, that's just not true. I got a big tax cut, and I live in middle America. I live paycheck to paycheck, just like everybody else does. I think 90% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. When they saw a bump in their pay, it helps everybody. It helps the restaurant employee, because they're getting tipped a little bit more, or people are going out to eat a little bit more. It even helps the business owner, because the business owner, guess what? They're the ones that hire everybody. They're the ones that can give those pay increases and everything. So yes, people say, well, it is a little bit of a trickle down effect. But at the end of the day, it did help a lot of Americans, and it got a lot of people out of poverty. He kept us out of any wars. I feel like, he, as far as his outside with working with other countries and stuff, his foreign policy is the word I'm looking for. he got along well with most everybody. He was the first president that ever walked foot in North Korea, correct?
I do believe that is correct.
When he made the trip over there. And Obama didn't do that. The Bushes didn't do that. Nobody did. So he tried to make peace. He wrote peace deals all throughout the Middle East. And I feel like he did in that respect. He kept us out of wars. He kept our troops safe. And, he didn't stick his nose where we didn't belong. He said that if you want to mess with us, he's going to steamroll you. And I think a lot of countries got that hint, so they didn't bug us. And now it's kind of like, I don't know what's going on, but I see a lot of problems, and I know a lot of Americans do. But now fast forward to 2020, and obviously that election, I still think about it to this day, and leading up to that election. So let's talk a little bit about leading up to that election. Okay. From the moment Trump got in, what happened to him when he was like day 2 in office? Do you remember, David?
Actually, no, I don't.
They tried to impeach him from like literally his second day in office. They wrote articles of impeachment on him. Then he had to go through all the Russia collusion nonsense, which was just always there. He ignored it all the time because he knew it was a nothing burger. And I think America knew it was a nothing burger. They spent $40 million on attorneys investigating this Russia collusion hoax that I think started with Hillary Clinton passing some dossier over and funneling money through different countries and stuff to make it look like there was a problem when there wasn't. So as soon as the Russia collusion thing was coming to an end, then this Ukraine thing started. Well, he's trying to get dirt on Joe Biden and this quid pro quo thing, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, here we go again. They're trying to impeach him for something else. And it's just a never-ending cycle of attack, attack, attack. As a nation, you cannot heal as a nation if one political party is always going after the other. You can't do it. You have to find common ground. And I don't think I can remember a time where Republicans and Democrats came together in the Trump era to actually do anything productive after Trump's, I think, second year. Like I think the Republicans held the House in 2017 and 2018, and I think they lost the House in 2019. And there was just nothing that happened. It was all just roadblock, every decision that anybody wanted to make. And then this Ukraine thing happened, and as soon as he got acquitted by the Senate in January, just think about this. The senators and Congress are more focused on impeaching a president over some nonsense than paying attention to a virus that's going on in China. So while Trump is trying to figure out this virus and where it came from and how deadly it's going to be, he is actively getting impeached. Just think about that for a second. It makes no sense at all. So the real agenda here, I think, is when they realized he was going to get through his impeachment and he was going to be acquitted, all of a sudden this virus gets released. And I find that very, very fishy. So now he's on his way to re-election without a hands down, you can't stop the guy. He's popular. And then all of a sudden the virus hits and it's taken America by storm. And I don't think anybody knew how to react. And I know a lot of politicians at the end of the day would say the wrong thing to do was shut down the economy. I think we handled it incorrectly. I think we should have kept the economy open through that time. I mean, if you look at the number of cases right now in the United States, there's 300 times more cases now than we had when we shut down the economy in March of 2020. Just think about that. And our economy is wide open right now. And then we shut it down. I remember North Carolina got shut down with 70 or maybe 700 cases in the entire state. And they shut us down. That's less than 0.1% of North Carolinians having a virus, and they shut us down. It's insane. Do you agree?
No, and I wouldn't necessarily say I agree or disagree, because I think there's a lot more than just looking at that number. because a big difference between then and now is now people say, well, we have a vaccine in place, and we'll get to the
That's right.
vaccine piece in just a second. But one of the things that you had mentioned was the impeachment of nonsense, the constantly of things just kind of them just trying to get in the way. Um, the Republicans did that to Bill Clinton, right?
They
What did he
did.
do? Right. So they did that to Bill Clinton, and it just then created this issue where, okay, this is how it's going to be. Also, there was a lot of negative energy towards President Obama.
There was.
So, that what you're saying is not an isolated thing to Donald Trump, and some people may argue that he kind of brought it upon himself with the way he is, right? But that's not a new thing. That wasn't necessarily a new thing that was there as far as one side of the aisle or the other trying to go after the commander in chief.
Yep. And it's been going on, and you're absolutely right. It's been going on for 20 years. It happened to Bush. The Dems went after Bush, the Republicans went after Obama. Obama got 2 terms out of it, though. And then they went after Trump. Trump got one term out of it. I think there's a lot of issues there, though, with the election that happened in 2020, and we can dive into that later if you'd like. But I do know that at the end of the day, I think that Trump was the right man for the job at the time. And I do feel like he was on his way to re-election until this pandemic hit, and we just didn't know how to react. I don't think the world knew how to react. We weren't prepared. And I also want to say something that's even more interesting, and and I encourage your listeners to go look this up. But I think Fauci even said in 2016, he spoke at Georgetown University and said that the next administration will face a worldwide pandemic. He said that in 2016. And then lo and behold, late 2019, this pandemic sweeps through the world, and we're still embroiled in it. And I honestly don't think we're ever going to get out of it, because these vaccines that they're creating and this virus that's out there, put it like this, it's like a Cold War or a nuclear war, okay, between a vaccine and between a virus. Every single time a new vaccine comes out, the virus is going to what?
So the idea behind
It's
it is
going to
kind of like what you're
mutate.
saying, the flu, like the flu
That's right. It's
mutates,
like
and
the
every
flu.
year they have the
Exactly.
flu
It's going to mutate. So this thing is not going away anytime soon. The virus is always going to be there, just like the seasonal flu was, except for the seasonal flu was normally what? September, October through February, March. Now it's constant COVID, fear, fear, fear. And it honestly, it's kind of getting worn out. I'm kind of getting sick and tired of people talking about it, because it's so polarizing, and it's creating this divisiveness in the country because of it. So I think if we would just, again, take a step back, focus on loving our neighbors as ourselves, focus on, how we can operate as a small town or as a city and take care of one another. At the end of the day, that's what's going to heal the country. It's not going to be going on to social media and blasting one another, or getting into arguments at the store, or or at work, or wherever it is. It's just not cool right now. We need to just lower the tension and focus on building our nation back. That's where we need to be as a country. Forget all the white noise, forget all the politicians that all they want to do is stir the pot and create problems and pin one another against each other. That it's got to stop. It's got to end. And like I said, I'm not, I am conservative in nature, but like I said before, I'll call them out for what they are. They're swamp creatures. They're swamp rats. All of them. They all are. There is so much corruption in Washington, D.C. It's probably all around the country. It's probably in every state capital. It's probably even in local precincts. And quite frankly, if we got rid of a lot of these people that have been around for a long time and put on term limits, a lot of it would go away immediately. And that's going to be the biggest thing moving forward. Is if I don't think Biden's going to do it because he's a career politician, but I think one day there's going to be a Congress and a Senate that can agree on career or term limits. And that's what's really going to change Washington, because you can't do it when you have people in there that are owned by the big banks, by social media, by big pharma. There's so much money that moves in and out of that city, and shaking hands and everything else, and it's utterly absurd. I saw it firsthand. I lived in Washington, D.C. You can't convince me that it's not going to happen, because it did. Okay. So I really think that getting rid of all the I'd like to just get rid of all of them today and just put all new house in, all new house, all new Senate, and start over. But we know that's not going to happen, because that's not how our laws are written. So I encourage everybody that before the next election, you really look at the candidates, okay? Regardless of who's in there, get some fresh blood in there, some people that have some new ideas. That's what's going to change. You're not going to change by putting another Chuck Schumer in there, or another Nancy Pelosi, or another Mitch McConnell, or it's just, the list goes on and on. There's like 40 of them that have been in there for longer than 30 years. It's absurd. It should never happen that way. How the Constitution, or way back in 1776, originally it was meant for, you would go serve your country for no more than an 8 to 10 year period, and then bring your knowledge back to your community and support your local government. And now these people, they move to DC and they stay there forever, and they're making our country look awful. We got to get them out. So just think about that, everybody. Before you go vote for that next person, what did they do for you, and what are they doing to heal our nation? If they can't answer, if you cannot honestly say that you think they're going to do a better job, vote them out. Get rid of them.
Well, you said a lot of really telling things there. One, the career politician. A lot of people are big fans of the idea of term limits, except for the politicians that are looking at sitting there for lifelong, really lifelong appointments. Some of them, where we have several that are in there for lifelong appointments. There is one thing that was commented, and I was actually going to make this comment, that both Bush and Obama had talked about the potential of a pandemic happening with the way just things were going. So this isn't really a new conversation, but I do agree with you when you said that when it happened, nobody really knew what to do. And I think people had an idea of what to do, but they were almost frozen at the
Yes.
idea of what to do. Because it's one thing to have the idea of, this could happen, this is what we need to do. And then when it really happens, being an athlete, they choked, right? They choked when the moment came up. And several people choked. But I want to get back to one piece, because there's so many things that you mentioned there. You had mentioned that you just, after a couple of weeks of wearing masks, you got tired of it. What was it about masks? And even now, because that was one of the things I had mentioned that I wanted to just get your thoughts on, the idea of masking. What is your thoughts on masking? Why did the masking annoy you then? Where do you see the future going as far as the idea of masking?
Okay, so this is an interesting topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. So my mom was in the healthcare industry for 35 years. She got her master's degree at the University of North Carolina. She studied public safety. She probably could have worked for the CDC or the DA, Department of Homeland Security, for things that deal with infectious diseases. So she was very well versed on it. Okay. I remember she told me when the pandemic first started, that if you have those cheap masks, the ones that you see most people wearing, the blue ones that cover your face, okay, those are good for about 4 hours. And what I mean by that is you need to change it out very often, because the amount of bacteria that builds up in those masks can be even worse for your lungs and your vital organs over time. And I'll touch base on that in a second. So obviously not everybody had the right type of mask. You see everybody, women doing it, men doing it. They're wearing their mask. They take it off. They touch it with their hands. They put it in their pocket. They put it in their purse. They hang it on their truck. They put it in their glove compartment. It's just dirty all the time. Students in school, same thing, mask in the pocket. Girls are putting it in their bras, putting it sweat. I mean, it's crazy, man. And then this thing is going back on their face to cover their face. So my mom was like, "This is ridiculous. These little paper masks has about a 10% efficacy rate, meaning that only 10% of the time it was stopping anything to go through it." And everybody's like, "Well, it can maybe stop a water droplet." Okay. Well, or a droplet of saliva. Okay. But the virus itself, I think she described it like it's like a mosquito going through a chain link fence. That's how small the virus is compared to the mask, the fibers of the mask. It can just go right through. So even during the pandemic, this is what we saw. Okay. Masking started, and then numbers kept going up and up and up and up. Did we not see that? Okay. We saw it. So then you talk about, all right, well, why is this happening? I'm going around everywhere. I don't like wearing a mask, but I obviously wore one when I went into the grocery store and took it off. And then the best part though is even on the box of mask, it said cannot be used to defend against the coronavirus. And I'm just like, it's right there. And even funnier is if you look at some of the masks different people wear, as far as like a painter or someone that's working with radiation or radioactivity, or a doctor, or even looking at somebody that works with infectious diseases, they wear the full bodysuit. They wear all the face covering and protective material. You know, they wear the N95 mask. It's just crazy. And to think that we're walking around in this pandemic with these paper masks on, or these cloth masks that really don't do anything but give people a sense of
You're saying it gives them a false sense of security?
yeah, yes, exactly. And I call it there's a word for it. I'm gonna remember it here in a second. But so recently, when the students started going back to school in Florida, there was a doctor of a student who said, okay, we're going to try something, a little social experiment. We're going to grab 6 masks off any given student. We're going to take them to the lab, and we're going to test them and see what's in them. So they did, and they found that there was all kinds of bacteria in these masks, food particles, other viruses, and then accompany all these things in. Let's throw in a PCR test. Okay. Are you familiar with what the PCR test is?
You're talking about that's not the rapid one. That's
the PCR test is in the wrap. It goes in your nose into the blood.
All the way. Yeah.
Right. The blood-brain barrier.
They basically touch your brain. Yeah.
Yes. It's touching your brain. And you're like, oh my God, what happened? Okay. So this PCR test, the inventor of the PCR test literally says, oh, it was never meant to test for coronavirus. It was meant to test for any type of illness, whether it were seasonal flu, whether it was just a common cold, the coronavirus, SARS, H1N1. It can detect anything at all. So imagine this, David. You've got a kid or a human. It can even detect bacteria that's wearing their mask all day long, sucking in their own carbon monoxide. Then they're like, okay, well, I'm not feeling too well. I guess I should go get tested. Okay, they go get tested, and then they say they have COVID. Okay, well, did they actually have COVID, or did they have something else? Because the PCR test was later confirmed to be that it did not work 100% accurately. It only had like a 3% efficacy rate to actually detect COVID-19. So everybody that's getting sick, and these are facts, go look them up. Everybody that's getting sick, was it really coronavirus? Was it really COVID-19? Or was it something else? Now, we do know that people were getting sick and dying from COVID-19. I'm not denying that. But 80% or maybe 90% of the people that died from COVID-19, guess what they had? A comorbidity. You know what that means? They were already sick with something else, whether it was diabetes, heart inflation, issues with their lungs. They were a lifelong smoker. and this virus attacked something inside their body that was already having a losing battle. So a lot of these people, some of them were already on their way out. They might have had a foot out the door, and the coronavirus, what it did was it pushed them right out the door, or put them 6 feet under. Unfortunately, that's how life works. What are two things in life that are certain? Do you know what those are?
Death and taxes, man.
Death and taxes. That's right. Or I call 3 actually: death, taxes, and utility bills. Because even if you pay your house off, you're still having to pay utility bills.
Utility bills.
That's right.
And so what you're saying is, right, and again, just to give you a chance to kind of expand and explain, what you're saying is that you do recognize and understand that coronavirus is very real. You do know and understand that there were deaths as a result of people contracting coronavirus. But also what you're saying is that there was an overinflation of potentially false positives related to the coronavirus.
Yes. And I say that because even after you look at all the numbers, and the CDC is very good about hiding things, they go back after about a month or two and they adjust their numbers. And the media was great at pumping fear. I mean, I remember there were times during the Trump presidency, closer to the end, and it was funny because Project Veritas actually caught one of the CNN producers talking about that fear generates ratings. Guess what ratings generates? Dollars for the news station. So I'm calling out, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they're all guilty of it. Even, OAN, they all do it. They're all about ratings and money. That's all they care about. They don't care about the little guy. They don't care about you or me. They care about money. That's the only thing that drives them is dollars. Okay. So I'm saying this PCR test overinflated things. It made the numbers look way, way worse than they actually were. I mean, think about it this way. Okay. Look at the total number of deaths. I don't know if you have a computer in front of you. I might actually try to find this, but the total number of deaths in 2019 compared to 2020 only went up by like 0.02% or something like that. So the United States only had like maybe 200,000 or 300,000 more deaths in 2020 than they did in 2019. But that was on average because our population went up as well. Okay. But then you also look at, here's the biggest factor: cases of the flu. The seasonal flu in 2019 was 32 million cases of the flu in 2019. Guess how many cases we had in 2020 of the flu?
Can't even think of what the number was. Yeah.
2,000. 2,000.
All right. So let me ask you this: that 2,000, right? Because you were just talking about the mass. Could any of that 2,000 just be as a result because we were closing off, not going out, staying away from each other, extra careful as a result of sanitizing and those kinds of things?
Maybe
we were able to limit it from that standpoint.
Yes, maybe, but correlation of numbers. Okay, you see COVID cases going up and everything else coming down. Okay, what I mean by everything else, okay, lung disease, heart disease, cancer. So those people that are supposedly supposed to be going into the hospital to have, surgeries on themselves are not being able to make it in. Okay, so guess what they're dying of now?
All right, so
coronavirus.
Shifted.
Yes.
And everything.
They shifted the numbers. Okay, so the coronavirus cases were highly inflated. I mean, way, way, way out there. This is in 2020. And then after the election, a few days after the election, or after Biden was sworn in, guess what they did? They adjusted the numbers on the CDC website. They took off like several 100,000 COVID cases and put them as other deaths, as other types of deaths. I cannot make this up. Go look it up. It's all there. It's all there.
So where you're coming from is you're saying this was done all in an effort to get rid of Donald Trump from office.
Bingo.
Okay.
Bingo.
So explain further, because part of the other thing that I said that I wanted you to talk a little bit about was election integrity, right? Um, so give us your thoughts on, here we are coming into the 2020 election. Donald Trump doesn't win. What do you
So
attribute that to?
so let's look at some numbers. Okay. And I'm a numbers guy. And I don't know, did you watch the Mike Lindell Cyber Symposium? Did you happen to catch that?
No, I did not.
All right, so I watched a little bit of it, but let's look at the history of voting in general. Okay. Trump got 74 million votes, almost 75. I think in 2016, he had 66 million votes. So he increased his vote total by no, you know what? I think he increased his vote total by 10 million. I'd have to double check the numbers, but I think he had 8 or 10 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016. Okay, so let's look at Obama. Obama, 2008, I think had 67 or 68 million votes. And then in 2012, Obama actually had less votes in 2012 than he did in 2008 and still won re-election. Why? Because he won certain counties in certain states. So Trump's numbers went up from 2016 to 2020. I meant they went up a ton. But you also have to look at something else. Everybody knows how big his rallies were. I don't think I went to a Biden rally because he was locked in a basement. And Trump's popularity was there. I mean, I think Trump even got COVID, didn't he?
Mhm.
Toward the end there, he got COVID. He was out for a couple days and came roaring back and ended up doing a lot more campaign events. But his average rally was like 30,000 people. That's insane. And when you look at the course of history and how presidents and even the Secret Service guys, I know a couple of them were telling me before the election, they said, yeah, this guy's going to win hands down. We've never seen anything like this in the history. Like his crowds were way bigger than Obama was when he was seeking re-election. It was insane, they said. So then you have him going in, and I think once he sniffed or hinted about the mail-in ballots, I think it was in 2019 was when the Democrats said, well, we just need to do mail-in ballots everywhere. Okay. And that had never been done before in the history of the United States. There's actually many countries in Europe that do not do mail-in ballots because there's a lot of fraud that goes on during mail-in ballots. So a lot of those European nations got rid of the mail-in ballot because of the amount of fraud. So here we are, middle of a pandemic. Let's but let's give every single person a mail-in ballot around the nation. I don't know about you, but I got 2. How many did you get?
I have one.
You got 1? Okay.
One.
I have some friends that got multiple mail-in ballots. Okay. So then Trump warns us about this. I think like 8 months before the election, he was like, I just have a bad feeling about this. He sniffed it out, saying there's going to be a lot of problems with these mail-in ballots, whether it's counting them or sorting them or anything like that. So then you have election night. Okay. And for the first time in history, a president that's sitting in office is up at 10 o'clock, 10:30. The media pundits are losing their minds because he's about to win re-election. And then what happens? 5 states stop counting all at the same time. Never happened before. And everybody knows it. If you're sitting here and saying it didn't happen, guess what? It did. And I remember having a conversation on the phone with my good friend Thomas, like a week before the election. And I said, the only way Trump is going to lose is if something big happens, and it's going to be fraud in 5 states or 5 or 6 states where there's heavily Democrat run counties, where there's corruption, and something's going to happen and he's not going to win those counties, which are going to turn the state from potential red to blue. So let's talk about those states and those counties. Okay. Fulton County, Georgia, heavy Democrat. Pennsylvania, around Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, heavy Democrat. Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. Then you have Maricopa County or Phoenix, Arizona. Las Vegas, Nevada. And Minneapolis, Minnesota, I believe was the other one. So 5 or 6 states, 5 or 6 counties where votes stopped being counted in the middle of the night. I believe they were trying to figure out how many votes they needed to push Biden over the top. I think Trump was so far ahead that they realized, holy cow, we need to find the votes. I think they had procured the votes in the mail-in ballots, and I call it artificial votes, where they never got mailed out. They just had them ready to fill out or already filled out, and they stuffed the ballots, they stuffed the boxes, and they pushed Biden over the top. So, hey, you can say everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but never in the history of our country have we not known who the president was supposed to be on election night. We always knew who the president was going to be on election night or the very next morning. This is the first time in the history of our country where we didn't know who the president was going to be until days later. This is true. And even Bernie Sanders even said it. Bernie Sanders said, here's what's going to happen on election night. Trump's going to be way ahead, and then all the mail-in ballots are going to come in late, and Biden's going to end up winning. And then you have Hillary Clinton coming out telling Joe, whatever you do on election night, do not concede. That's kind of peculiar. Then you have Biden himself even saying, hey, it doesn't really matter who votes. It matters who counts the votes. Then Biden even coming out and saying, I'm trying to remember his exact quote, but we have organized the most extensive voter fraud organization in the history of the world. Those are Biden's words, not Trump's. So you just kind of have to wonder what in the world was going on. Well, I saw something the other day that kind of caught my eye. I was, are you on TikTok, David?
Yeah.
So I know a lot of Americans are. And I saw Trump talking to a group of supporters. This is recent, like within the last week. And he says to them, we caught them all. We caught all the fraud. We've caught all the swamp in one big trap. And I don't know what he meant by that. So I'm kind of peculiar. I'm kind of intrigued. Did they actually find a lot of the fraud? Did our military find the fraud? Did we track it? It's not just ballots. I think it's computer. I think it's election fraud too, as far as hacking the voting machines. At least based on Mike Lindell's, cyber symposium, he put out $5 million, and nobody could say that what his numbers weren't accurate. Not one person came forward and said, "Hey, your numbers are wrong." So you got to wonder, was there actual voter fraud, and if so, how much? And then you have this guy Keishel come out and say, "Oh yeah, there were like 8 or 10 million votes for Trump that were unaccounted for." And so you got to wonder, just do the math. So let's go back to the math. In the United States as a whole, there were, I'm trying to remember, I think about 140 million Americans, or 160 million Americans that were registered to vote. Usually about 60 to 65% of those people vote. Okay. So let's just say it's on average 65% vote of that number. So that would have put us roughly 135 million people, or 100, maybe 130 million people. And then how many votes? Let's see here. Let me pull up my calculator. So Biden had 81
there's
million
one
votes.
thing while you're doing that. So one of the things that you're saying is that the greatest scam in American history was conducted on election night against
Yes.
President
And
Trump.
I say that. So here's the number.
No,
here's the number. Combined total between both candidates, 155 million votes, okay, which is the most in the history of the United States. That's how many people voted. And Biden, being the fact that he had 81 million votes and campaigned out of his basement, he is clearly unpopular right now with the American people. I can't find a single person on Facebook or any social media that is defending this man. Just saying, where do those 81 million voters go? Because I can't find them unless they're back hiding in their basement. I don't know. I see a lot of Trump voters out there. Biden even went to his hometown in Delaware a little while ago, and an army of Trump people showed up to welcome him. Biden was rolling down some highway in the middle of nowhere, and there's a bunch of construction workers on the side of the road. Guess what? These construction workers turned their back to him. Yes, it is divisive, but at the same point, I think people are catching on. I remember when Biden got inaugurated. Do you remember what happened on January 6th?
What are you talking about when you said when Biden was inaugurated?
No, on January 6th. Do you remember what happened?
No, what happened?
All the Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. Remember that?
Oh, okay, yes, on the 6th. So
they called it an insurrection. The real insurrection happened on the night of November 3rd at 5 a.m. in the morning, when they rigged the vote and gave the election to Joe Biden. That's when the real insurrection happened.
All right, so I'm going to throw this out there just
January
as
6th.
A thing. Usually when somebody gets caught cheating, that's not the first time they've cheated. So really what you're claiming is that the idea of fraud could have happened many a time before that with an election.
Oh, absolutely. I think fraud has been going on.
I'm going to rewind this. So if you believe that could happen on 2020, you have to believe it could have happened in 2016.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Okay, I think fraud. But the thing is, though, in 2016, though, they couldn't find the fraud. They were saying there was fraud, but they just couldn't find it. Okay. And same thing with 2020. If you look at right now, the audits are going on in Maricopa County. The audits are going on in Georgia. Okay. That was my wife. She's saying, I need to go find another room to talk in. So you got the audits going on in 2020. Or the audits for right now from the 2020 election in Maricopa. They're starting up in Pennsylvania. They're going on in Georgia. And I think a lot of the audits that they did right after the election, they were solely to appease the media. And they weren't necessarily audits that dug deep down into the fraud. They just recounted the same votes that they already had, which we don't know if those votes were, from actual voters or from people that just filled out ballots. But one thing I do know that's very interesting is all those counties where Biden won at the last minute, there were more votes for only Biden on the ballot and no down ballots, no down ballot voting. Does that make sense, David?
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So everybody voted for Biden and Kamala, but they forgot to vote for their state legislators, their congressmen, their senators, their librarian. Who knows, man? It was just everybody. And that you have to wonder why. All these mail-in ballots, think about it. When it shows up in your mailbox, you have a couple days to think about it, right? So you're going to sit down at your kitchen table and you're going to fill that thing out thoroughly to make sure that it's all good before you put it back in and send it back out. But not this election. There were more people in the history of our country that voted in any other time, more mail-in ballots, and it just so happens that Biden got just enough on election night to push him over the top. Yeah, I don't buy it. And I think a lot of Americans are waking up to the fact that there probably was fraud. And I know about 80% of the Republicans now know there was fraud. And I think the last poll they did, up to 20% of Democrats are now saying they think that there was fraud.
So, a couple of things. One, you had mentioned an election never being first time in history. That actually was not correct, because you had Gore versus Bush. That was actually not decided till much later by the Supreme Court. And actually, we had somebody who's watching who pointed that out as well. But that is one of those instances. But we are kind of drifting a little bit. Brad, I will say that this conversation is a little bit different than I thought how it was going to go, right? Because I feel you fall a little bit more one way versus the other, but you at least subscribe to the idea that our government can be full of shit, just like either side of the aisle, no matter what is going on. But this last thing, I want to give you an opportunity because we're at about an hour now, so we've didn't get a chance to talk everything that I would have liked to talk to, but I want to give you your shot to kind of give your last thoughts. So here is the rant and rave section. Just to kind of tie everything together, what are some of your final thoughts that you want to leave us with before we wrap up tonight?
I would just say, err on the side of caution with everything. And we definitely see a lot of people in the country right now jumping to conclusion, and they're assuming, they're putting their foot in their mouth. They're not paying attention to the facts. They're paying attention to what their politician tells them and what the media tells them, and they're not doing their own research. So I encourage people that, and I'll tell you right now, my grandmother actually called me about a month ago, and she's 94 years old. She's been reading the newspapers and watching the news for probably longer than anybody that's been watching your show combined. Okay. She called me and she told me, I just noticed that I get 3 newspapers and they always all say the exact same thing. Okay. Always same topics, same verbiage. And so she got rid of 3 of her papers and now she only gets 1. And then she sees the same thing on a lot of the local news stations around the country. It's the exact same verbiage delivered by different personalities. So I do feel like the media is controlling what's going on in the country right now. I think they're very manipulative. I think they have their own agenda to drive ratings, division, and fear, which is wrong. So I encourage your listeners that, if there's a hot topic, go do your own research. Use DuckDuckGo. Okay. Don't use other search engines than Google, because Google will censor everything. They've been doing it forever. Facebook will ban people from talking and freedom of speech and everything. Dude, Twitter, Jack Dorsey. So Jack Dorsey was a veteran. Okay. This guy, he censored the president of the United States. He took him off his platform. And yet guess who's still on his platform? The president of Iran, who chants death to America every single day. So I just find it very interesting. But like I said, I think Americans are starting to figure it out that we can't depend on government. They need to get out of our way. Let us get back to living our lives and being free. That's it. It's my 2 cents.
Hey man, thank you so much, Brad. I want to tell you thank you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Like I said, it gave me a chance to just sit and listen to perspectives from somebody that I just haven't really had a chance to catch up with, talk with. So I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your views, because like I said, conversation is the only way we're going to be able to move forward. And a big thing, this conversation went completely different than I was expecting. There were a lot of things you said that, from a standpoint of hey, I don't like what's going on either side of the aisle. There are things that we need to do to try and get America back right on track. So I appreciate that. Couple other comments coming in that I'm just kind of throwing up. And as I wrap up tonight, next week is going to be a little bit more lighthearted. In the conversation, we're not talking politics, we're not talking masks, vaccines, COVID, any of that stuff. We're going to be talking actually Marvel Cinematic Universe with a couple of Marvel super fans next week. So it's going to be an interesting conversation just on where they think things are going with Marvel and kind of the empire they've built with the movies. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Hope everybody can tune in. And again, Brad, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate you taking the
Yep.
time. Tell your wife I said thank you for letting me borrow you for the last hour, for you to share your thoughts. I really appreciate it.
I will.
But you
Thank you
guys,
for having me on, David. I appreciate it. Have a good
no,
night.
you're welcome. You have a good night too.